Hello.
Pretty slim pickings today.
Just you and me and all of our friends.
Yeah. Leonard was on for a while with a friend of his. They were having breakfast at a country club in SoCal, which, looked a lot more attractive to me than the North Pacific fog, whatever, cold here in the middle of summer. So we chatted with him and his buddy from his EVP over at Intuit for a bit.
Intuit.
Yeah.
Quicken. I used to use
That's right.
stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And guess what? He's doing stuff with generative AI.
Of course. You mean like generating financial information, like personal information?
Probably, something like that. He talked about how much money they spend on accountants' brain power each year.
Oh, I see. That kind of generative AI. Like I'm going to replace your job AI, that kind of AI.
That kind of AI.
Ooh.
Just in case you didn't think there was any other kind, folks.
Hey, there's always low resource, low impact, low cost, high impact, low cost edge AI,
Right. That's right. That's not about
that doesn't actually replace jobs, but whatever.
See, there you go. Yeah. Wow.
Just my take on it.
That's a good take.
Well, since it's you and me, we can hype our episode 6 that's coming up.
That was awesome, man. Absolutely. Joe B.
It was a good edit last night. It was a good edit. I think a lot of good stuff in there. So for those that don't know what we're talking about, Windows Phone WTF, What Are the Facts series, episode 6 out of 9, is coming out on the 30th, live streamed on YouTube. And its special guest is Joe Belfiore, and the title is Thriller, The Birth of Windows Phone. Including, we do reference that dance in the video in there, so that's why. For those that are in the know, there was a very famous parade that launched Windows Phone that had a Thriller dance in it, and also like an iPhone funeral.
That is the only way I would watch this episode, is if there's a Thriller dance. That's going to pull people in.
We get Joe's real-time commentary on that whole situation. But no, it's a good episode.
Great.
About an hour and a half, so it's it's a chunky one. Get comfortable.
It is chunky, we're eking our way towards like Joe Rogan long form 3 hour. I'm going to talk.
There's a lot in there. I mean,
I'm going to talk to Lex Friedman for 3 hours about UFOs or something.
Yeah, so everyone who's into a little tech history and Windows Mobile, Windows Phone, check it out on the 30th.
Yeah. What a great time it was,
Yeah.
Where are we today with phones? I mean, gosh.
Boring. Slabs. Well, there's the foldable phones. I think we talked about that last time.
Yeah.
Like the Samsung Unpacked event. And
right.
I have to give them credit. They're hanging in there on the foldables. And I guess once they get the price down, then why wouldn't you want a bigger screen?
Do you feel like maybe you and I need to have a personal meeting with their CEO and say, just to give you some insight, if you want these foldables to be the next big thing, it has to be priced in a way that people will allow you to make it be the next big thing.
You were just about to give it.
Because, when a foldable costs as much as a house payment or something crazy, you just eliminated so much of the market.
Well, I'm sure there's a lot of cost in there. There's the yield and all that stuff, but the issue is the higher, it's just like a big SUV. That's where all the margin is. They get all the margin from the luxury,
right?
These things, so they're probably their highest margin phones, and I'm sure they've done the analysis on elasticity, price.
Because you always have what there's that company or these people who do teardowns of all the phones and figure out what the parts actually cost and all that kind of stuff, and you find out
bill of materials, they call it, right? Then they put it in a blender, they see if it blends,
see if it blends, but then they can figure out this is what it actually costs Apple to make this phone. This is what you're paying. Right.
Well, it's called profit, so I mean, you can't fault people for they're actually selling it to you for more than they've cost them to make it. Oh my God. What a ripoff.
What a ripoff. I can't believe that. It should be at cost.
You should just do it as a service,
Oh my gosh.
It'd be good. So someone, I think what's going to happen is you got Samsung up there. Someone's going to come in and disrupt and come up with some kind of lower cost, way of doing these things, and then that'll disrupt the market. But I don't expect Samsung to cannibalize their high margin luxury phone business.
But you're right. There's some, whenever new things come out and you see lots of news happening and lots of people doing reviews of these things, and so some people have been. There's the Fold and there's the Flip that they have, and a lot of people compared. Motorola's got a Razr kind of a flip phone that people are saying is neck and neck or might be better. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I mean, Motorola's got the legitimate heir to the throne on flip phones, so
they sure do. They sure do.
That Razr, RAZR.
Exactly.
Actually, a funny headline when remember when the guy Xander was the CEO and he left.
Yes.
The headline was Xander Zandr is a goner, GONR.
Oh, wasn't Xander an ex Sun Microsystems guy?
I think so.
I thought he was. Yeah,
he took over Motorola, but it was a tough time for Motorola, and unfortunately, he was holding the wheel.
It's interesting. There's a lot of you don't hear no one. I don't. In the history of computing and all this stuff, like obviously we're doing with phones, and you see stuff like that. I don't see much about the history of Sun Microsystems, or at least bringing those into the canon of the computer history. It's always.
Are you suggesting another 9-part series on Sun Microsystems and Java?
Maybe. It's always Jobs versus Gates, and like
A2ME WTF. That's
yeah. Yes. There you go. Because there's a whole other world of people out there that live that life,
Yeah, no, it was a big, I wouldn't say alternate universe, but it was a very popular platform that had a ton of community. I was actually on the JCP executive committee for a little while because I worked at a company that did embedded Java. We had our own JVM.
That's awesome.
Insignia Solutions. Remember Insignia?
Yeah, I do. Absolutely.
Yeah, so they had their own. We wrote our own JVM, our own dynamic adaptive compiler. Like we were really into it, and it was like super high performance. J2ME.
There's a whole story there. There's probably a story about Java for sure, and a lot of people just synonymously think about Java when they think of Sun, but Sun started with some brilliant. Server, they're hardware people. They built servers, and workstations, ultra high-end workstations,
Someone cuts us a check for 6 figures. I'm happy to do another series.
Well, Macintosh is doing this thing, and then there's Next doing this thing, and Bill G's over here doing Windows in the 90s, and obviously doesn't have any taste, according to Steve Jobs. But hiding in the background, not at Circuit City, but somewhere else, there were these Sun Microsystems workstations, which are probably closer to like Silicon Graphics. I mean,
they were high performance workstations. This was like pre-NT, right? I mean,
yeah. But even with NT, if you remember the 90s of Microsoft, it wasn't like there was a crown put on Microsoft. You're now an enterprise company.
No.
People were kicking sand in our face all throughout the 90s saying, you're not a real enterprise company. You're not serious. You have to keep rebooting your operating system.
Windows 3.1. Solitaire,
Yeah. And so you had people at Oracle who were like, you guys aren't enterprise. Sun Microsystems, Silicon Graphics. It's like, this is the real deal. Unix,
Unix.
When it actually has to work.
Yes. You touch upon the whole thing about Java. The reason why Java had so much energy behind it was because there was such a fracturing of platforms back then.
Yeah.
And to this day, if you talk about IoT, right, and edge computing, there's still this desire to sort of write once and run anywhere.
Yeah.
Which is always a bit of a, unicorn with wings on it. It's not possible. But even today with AI, right? It's like, I want my AI model. I got my data set. I'm going to train my model and I want it to run across all these different, edge platforms, accelerate. It's like, no, it doesn't work that way.
It doesn't work that way.
Doesn't. And so Java was like, we'll create this basically a containerized workload.
Yeah.
And it'll run inside of this thing. And then people will port their VMs to all these different funky things and everything will just run.
Right.
From a developer side, which, it kind of worked, but it was like slow as shit for most of it.
It was slow. I remember a lot of people don't realize. So, obviously James Gosling is the father of Java.
Yep.
And what a lot of people who weren't in that world don't realize is Java was originally made for embedded stuff, for set-top boxes and things like that.
There
Duke.
he is.
It's Duke.
Duke.
Yes, I used to go to that event every year.
Yeah, Java 1.
Java 1. Yeah. It was cool.
I got this as Java 1.
Yeah, I think I got
so this is, in fact, this is a puppet. There's a thing. So if you really wanted to get into it.
That's awesome.
Fully articulated Java 1 puppet, Java puppet.
I love that. It's interesting, though. Isn't it interesting how different tech streams will be happening, not one after the other, but concurrently? And depending on which universe or multiverse you're in, that's your whole life. And then other people could completely ignore it. Because I've had people make fun of me following the Microsoft track through my career, where there's other people who grew up, out of university into big time stuff, and it was all mini computers or Unix and stuff like that, and then Linux and then Sun and all that. And that was their world the whole time. And they would laugh at Microsoft stuff down at, Egghead Software.
Right.
It's like, come on, guys.
They didn't buy the stock back then, I guess. But
I guess you're right.
Not laughing now.
Not laughing now. Exactly. And so, I find that pretty interesting how you can have the multiverse is real in technology.
The multiverse is real in the tech world. And, and these are solving, we keep trying to solve the same problems over and over again. The idea of code portability. If you're a developer, right? I mean, like you have these frameworks like Spotify, like Electron app frameworks and these other things where it's like, well, I want to write an app, but I really don't want to rewrite it for each platform. So I'll write it in this framework and then the framework will work.
Right.
And it's the same thing. Code portability is just one of those issues that's been around since the beginning of time. And that's what virtualization on the cloud. I mean, that's code portability, right? It's a virtualized machine. And
I mean, I thought the JVM idea was a great idea. I know people even today who, there's still tons of Java being written all the time.
Oh, arguably, that's the core of the Android OS is
absolutely. But even in cloud, big stuff, I've heard people say, oh, we're not using containers or Docker or any of that stuff. JVM's already does that stuff. I don't know what you guys are talking about or why you're wasting your time with that. And I'm like, because Docker allows you to say it works on my machine. Oh, and now my machine is working on a server.
Right. I drink your milkshake.
That's right. I drink your milkshake. But breaking me as a writer, writing technical books and articles, it's all about Java. I got my start in the 90s writing articles for Java Developers Journal when Java was hot. Which is funny because the 90s were also when Visual Basic was hot. And active server pages came out and the web was exploding. But at the same time, Java was a new thing, like kind of half, I'd say the second half of the 90s,
right?
When you finally had Java 1.0 and then 1.2 and all that.
Well, you could argue that, Android's sort of proven out if you have enough semiconductor horsepower under the hood to run JVMs, then it's a great idea.
Yeah.
It's just at the time, things were pretty underpowered. I mean, I remember back in the early 2000s, we were porting our VM into lots of different platforms. And, it's pretty good for embedded things and stuff, but real user interaction, it was like a little sloggy. And
I think the first time people ever heard the term JIT compiler was because of Java.
Just in time.
Because Java was about this whole weird bytecode thing, as you said, going into a framework, and this Java virtual machine, and then the JIT compiler would turn it into native code for the platform underneath.
That's right.
And there was that notion of Java being slow. I remember when
kind of had that ding.
Yeah, I remember in the late 90s when Microsoft got on board with Visual J++. And there's a whole story there, folks. If you love stories about lawsuits, and that's why you tune into the Microsoft channel, if you want to hear
Visual J++ WTF.
Yeah, exactly. The Microsoft, for a while, there was enough love where Sun says, we're going to leave it to Microsoft engineering to build the JVM for Windows because they know Windows better. And it was noticeably faster than other JVMs running in other places. And then, of course, there's the other story remember there was an earlier battle between Microsoft and Borland, programming language wars, right? Because Microsoft was originally, that's what the business was. It was languages and stuff like that. It's a developer company. And
compilers and stuff.
In the earlier days, it was Microsoft versus Borland. Borland was building C++, Turbo Pascal. Arguably the single most important hire ever made by Microsoft. Anders Heilsberg was the guy who created Turbo Pascal, and then he ultimately created Delphi at Borland, which was as easy to use as Visual Basic, and yet it was faster than C++. It was Object Pascal. I know all you people find this really interesting, don't you?
Fascinating. Well, yeah, and interestingly, dev tools are obviously still a big part of the Microsoft culture.
Yeah. And, there was a time when it's like everybody at Microsoft codes. The janitor codes, the secretary codes, everybody's a developer at Microsoft,
Video.
And so an interesting tie-in. There's two tie-ins from Borland in that early world. Philippe Kahn was the CEO of Borland.
Kahn invented the camera phone, by the way.
He was a fiery personality, if you remember.
Yeah, I remember. I met him several times. He pioneered the camera phone, putting a camera in.
That's pretty amazing. It's pretty amazing. And so not only did we get Anders, because Anders ultimately created .NET, and he created C# and all that stuff, which is kind of a big deal for us, and TypeScript. And I remember that back and forth about stealing him away from Borland. Microsoft's going to pay him this big money, and then Borland says, we'll double your money. And then I think Bill Gates said something to the effect of, how far do you want to go with this? I could bankrupt your company in order to get this guy's brain. But Anders caused a lot of problems and stirred the pot in the Java world because he thought there were a lot of flaws in how Java was designed, and he came up with better ways to do things that broke Java and made it way better, but it broke it and then led to a giant lawsuit from Sun against Microsoft. The whole embrace and extend and all that kind of stuff, all these terms.
Embrace. Exactly. The crushing embrace.
Yeah. And it's like, and so Scott McNealy, who was the CEO for most of the time at Sun, he was like losing it. He's like, Microsoft's, bastardizing Java. Yeah. Anders is like, no, I'm just a whole lot smarter than all of you people. And inner classes and some of these other, the way J and I to talk to native platforms is crap. Here's how you should do it. All the things he did, he put in the last version of Visual J++ 6. And it was, but if you have to be a real developer geek to care about this stuff, folks. If you look at the last version of Visual Studio in the 90s, before we got into the .NET era, and you launched Visual Studio, whatever it was, 97, 98, whatever the last version was in the 90s, J++ was delayed. It didn't ship at the exact same time as everything else. It's because Anders was coming on board, and Anders totally tore it apart.
Redoing it.
And if you use the last version of J++'s IDE, you'll go, oh my God, it's .NET. It looks like the Visual Studio .NET that you would see in the 2000s, the way it worked and everything. And so you kind of see the genesis. And people talked about Project Cool in the late 90s to build the C#, and a kind of a, I don't want to call it a knockoff of Java, bytecode deal, because it was certainly much faster.
Yeah, inspired by Java.
Yeah, inspired by, exactly.
We actually, I have a similar, another JVM story. So I was in Insignia, we were writing we had this little embedded JVM, and it was faster than Sun's because we had this kind of architecture to interpret the bytecodes in a certain way and do some fast stuff. But we had ported it to a new platform. This is in 2001 called, I think at the time it was called Windows CE, or it was like the early Microsoft mobile phone platform.
Wow.
Yeah, we demoed it at Java 1. I think it was in 2002, maybe. Yeah. We demoed like the Microsoft mobile phone running Java midlets.
Ooh.
Which kind of blew everyone's mind because they're like, now Microsoft's going to ship, on this phone, all the Java midlets and stuff.
Right.
And we got a lot of press on that. We were a tiny little company, like 25, 50 people, whatever.
Awesome.
But it was a big deal. We were a Microsoft partner.
Yeah.
And they, of course, Microsoft was very excited about bringing Java to their platform and all these Java midlets that would just run, quote unquote.
Yeah. That's awesome.
So it was a big deal. That was kind of one of my big entrees to Microsoft, which eventually they said, why don't you just work here? And so
why don't you just work here? Bring your midlet with you.
Bring the midlets.
Exactly.
That's how I got to Microsoft in the early 2000s, was through that JVM thing.
That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. I remember writing an article, all right, so doing Pocket PC stuff. I remember then working early days with some oil and gas companies. You saw the ruggedized devices running Pocket PC, barcode scanning, all that kind of stuff. And I remember doing a project for a company in Texas, and we're using the first version of the .NET Compact Framework, which was mostly working fine, but as an alternate deal, just to see if it would be better, there was another version of Java that you're probably familiar with. It was not as small as J2Me. It was called Personal Java. There was this notion of profiles or something in Java.
Yes, Java profiles. Yeah.
Yeah.
Big Java, little Java.
So anyway, there's this thing called Personal Java that literally, and maybe it's all your fault for all I know, that would run on the Pocket PC, basically CE. And what would be product, and ultimately ran on Windows Mobile. And so we am using, remember the early windowing stuff for Java was called AWT before Swing came out and all that. And we built this whole Java thing running on rugged Pocket PCs, barcode scanning and stuff like that.
Cool.
And it's like, wow, who knew? Yeah, it was pretty cool.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. Yeah. So what's the equivalent today of write once, run anywhere in the IoT edge world? I mean, I guess in the MPU space, you've got things like K8s and K3s that are sort of like containers. And then there's like WASM, WASM is way out there. Maybe WASM is the next Java for
I think you're probably right.
Tiny edge devices. I don't know.
Yeah. Do you feel like WASM's taken off or caught on?
I'm hearing more about implementations on it. People are betting on it more.
Yeah.
So it's getting a little more mainstream. I think everyone's trying to do, now that everyone has cloud-based solutions, they're trying to do cloud DevOps that extends all the way out to the farthest edges of their deployment. And so they'd like to use cloud DevOps orchestration tools on everything. Yeah. And, as you know, once you get below, I don't know, 8 gig of RAM or whatever, you can't really have a K8 or anything on there. So now you're like, okay, K3s and all kinds of other funky bits out there. And so I think people are looking at WASM as potentially a way to scale cloud DevOps all the way down to, there's also something called ACRI too, which is like another Kubernetes resource initiative, which is like, how do you take Kubernetes-based management of workloads out to like little leaf devices,
I mean, that kind of bit us a little bit. The first version of Lumada Hitachi was written in Java, and we were using containers before anybody else. Gartner told us that. They were so impressed. And so Docker containers. Now, Kubernetes was not yet a big thing at that time. This is 2016. There was Docker Storm, or there's a few other players that could orchestrate your Docker containers for you. And so we did that. But to your point, we learned a lesson. You are stressing servers, cloud servers, any kind of server. You're stressing it more by using these containers and orchestration.
Sure.
Because it's using more resources. Yeah. And then we double stressed them by putting Java inside a container.
Ooh.
Java had yet to be optimized. So a JVM inside each container.
It was like one of those Russian doll things.
Yes, it was. But a really big fat one.
Russian doll architecture. So that's a tough one.
The Russian doll architecture. This is Vladimir today. I'm going to talk to you. And so it was and so we had to use larger VMs, in AWS because of the stress that containers and Java and all that put on there.
Well, that is the paradox. That is the inherent paradox of portability. The portability tax, right? You're using more system resources to get more portability. There's like some kind of law there. Should name it after somebody, but there is a portability law that says and then so that the problem is when you get out to edge computing and lower cost, lower power devices, right? Which is kind of what's the big value prop for edge.
Yeah.
Then you're saying, oh, well, I want portable code on that. It's like, yeesh, that's where you sort of run into a brick wall on things.
It is like a brick wall. Hey, Marc.
There's Marc.
Hey, how are you doing?
Marc can save us from this very esoteric conversation about
but no, he won't.
Java containers.
We're talking about programming languages and virtualization, and we talked about the history of Java. Actually, we've been talking about Java and Sun Microsystems and that whole journey.
My Java guy.
Remember him?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it was an interesting moment of the history, right? The Java virtual machine invention. It was like it was super interesting. And then actually it opened as well all the wall to mobile development when Android just appears with the Dalvik machine, which was like a Java virtual machine for mobile phones. So all of the Java developers could just reinvent themselves and start doing mobile applications and get rich on
Android developers.
Android, yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Which sounds much cooler than Java developer.
And you know what, Marc?
Absolutely.
I remember, so there was I'd say the hype and excitement of Java in the second half of the 90s. And every week they were adding new capabilities. I remember going to Java 1, and this will seem silly to people, but they would announce things like, and now Java supports printing. Now Java supports whatever. It's amazing, And then they came out that Java Swing graphical interface to build rich user interfaces.
I'm sure there are still companies using those old,
Yeah, and you could change the theme. Remember, there was like you could use the Unix, like the open look UI, like you would have on a Sun workstation, or there was the metal theme. And then they'd have the theme that looked like Windows XP and stuff like that. But you're right. I felt like Java started to run out of gas in the early 2000s, especially because Sun Microsystems started to struggle. They did very well during the dot-com times because venture capitalists were saying, here's your millions of dollars, and I want you to go buy Sun servers because that's the only way you can do this new internet thing. And people were paying a fortune for Sun servers. And then the realization hit that, cheap Linux servers were just as good. Oops.
Yeah, I remember I was developing on the web on ASP, PHP, and then there was this JSP.
Yes, JSP.
So you could program websites, dynamic websites on Java as well.
Yeah, you're right.
But you needed too much resources, right? And that was, I was as well scared when I was starting to read Java for IoT.
Yes.
Like, no, please.
That's what we're talking about is the paradox of resources and portability. And
if you had to have an IoT device that was running on a battery, you probably would not choose Java to develop for.
You couldn't.
Too much resources being used.
That's why everyone likes to do bare metal if they can.
Yeah.
They can get away with it. Because it's always the most performant, way of doing things is also the least portable. So again, there's that paradox of.
And yet, but that's fine. You find, I think it's today you find your niche, right? And you focus on who are your ideal customers, right? And why do you need to go to embedded devices if your ideal customers are running on bare metal or on a specific hardware?
Yeah. The ironic thing is C is a portable language, and that is how you would build cross-platform stuff. Obviously, there's frameworks and libraries for a particular platform you have to use with it.
Pilots,
But it's interesting how that would play out. And it's Bill.
What's up?
We are talking about programming languages and Java virtual machines and the history of Sun Microsystems and all that stuff.
Did you throw .NET in there as well?
A little bit, but I didn't want to steal Java's thunder. I was like, was that ever part of your life, Bill? That world?
So .NET or Java?
Java.
Java is a big deal for us. 100%. The thing about it is that there are very few. It's just the world's not strong on Java developers.
Really?
Right. They all became Android developers. That's what we were saying.
Yeah. I mean, and so whenever I bring on anyone, I'm like, you've got to have strong Java skills. It's mandatory. I mean, I need Java and I need Python and those are the needs that I have. I mean, if you're looking at real modern software development, it's going to be in those two languages.
And that is interesting. But it's valid. It's your world. And so the solutions you're building are
I would say it depends.
It depends.
Well, it does, but I mean, look at here. Here's the thing, right? Look at how people are going after, because a lot of the stuff that we do, I would say a large majority of the stuff that we do is real time, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, so we're looking at streaming data. And the way that people tend to get to streaming data, you'll hear a lot of Kafka, Spark, and it's, I've even had debates with people over building digital twins, and they're like, well, I'm going to use Orleans. Okay, I know where you're at now. You're a .NET developer that is built in on the Microsoft platform, and the only way that you know how to get from here to there is to take the Xbox stuff and turn it into a real-time streaming data platform. No, not going to work. Like I said before, in several instances, that shit'll never work. It will not scale. Gaming systems are not industrial IoT solutions that rely on real-time streaming data. Stop it.
There you go.
Give us the Will Smith slap.
Keep my name out. Wow.
Exactly. Oh my God.
It's a fact though, right? I mean, and I'm willing to debate anyone on the applications and what you're doing. It's not so much that you can technically get this stuff to work. I mean, Orleans can do certain things, but will it scale to millions of devices across multiple networks? No, it will not. And the cost to operate is going to kill you.
So for all you kids out there listening in here, Saturday morning cartoons, Orleans was something that came out of Microsoft Research. It's an actor framework. It's not, you would use .NET with it, but it's an actor framework. So there are other actor frameworks out there. And so if you're doing it in Java, I'm sure there's an equivalent that people would use to do that. You don't create that from scratch yourself.
No. I mean, it's our stuff, and it's out there, right? I mean, our stuff is web agent based. Yeah. So we're talking about web sockets left and right, and you can't, they're not apples to apples comparisons. Right? Actor-based model, you can scenario them out and say, okay, well, this is as close as we're going to get. But the functionality of it and how fast you need your things to work, that's the proof that's in the pudding. I mean, at the end of the day.
But your friends over at Swim used an actor-based model for their solution.
Socket-based.
Well, communication was socket, but the notion of all these little lightweight actors, as opposed to lots of
distributed,
the way the things that were talking to each other, No, I thought their architecture was pretty interesting, actually.
Yeah,
I remember.
There's a lot of things.
Go ahead.
I remember the first time I met Rob, 10, 12 years ago. You asked me if the things I was based on Kafka, because everyone was the statement of all the startups doing IoT platforms was, this is Kafka with MQTT, HTTP.
It seemed that way at the time. A lot of people were like, this goes back to Java, though. The whole Apache Foundation was based on Java software. If you go into Apache and look at the catalog of software to download for free, most of them are all written in Java.
Yep.
Like almost all of them are. They are. Good or bad, whatever. It just happened to be that way. And maybe because the Apache Foundation started in the height of the late 90s when Java was really hot. And you had the Apache web server. That was kind of what started it. And a lot of companies...
Tomcat.
Tomcat. A lot of companies wanted to save money and they needed a web application server. And so they would download Tomcat, which was not designed for production I can't tell you how many giant companies use Tomcat in production. And it was because it was free and they could do Java servlets or JSP or something like that back then. Yeah, I don't want to.
How many technologies are on production that are not designed to be on production?
A lot.
A lot of them.
A lot of them.
And probably that there is a big disclaimer, right, on the website where you download it, or on the GitHub repository, or.
In fact, do you remember in the early days of Java, the little README text that comes with it, you know, the EULA, it would state Java's not meant to be used in mission critical systems, nuclear reactors, any control systems.
I remember that.
It was like they're, you know, we're covering our ass by saying don't use Java for any of this important stuff. I don't know if they still do that anymore, but in the early days they did, because they didn't know if it would handle the load or whatever. It's interesting stuff. Wow. Digital twins in Java. Java Beans.
There you go.
Oh my God.
Remember when that came out? Oh my gosh.
I mean, it's a real thing. There are literal companies built around the ability to stream data and derive insights. But there's, the conversation is much more and it's much deeper than all of that, right? I mean, it's still, you have to be concerned about the quality of your data. You still have to be concerned about contextualization. But how are you doing this, in terms of these applications and your endpoints or your distributed nodes that are wanting to trade information with each other as fast as possible? And now we get into the notion of the machine learning aspect of it, and your storage and compute at the edge, and your building of a knowledge graph, and what that knowledge graph is actually doing, and your visualization across all of that, and how snappy that visualization is, which gets us into the conversation of how are you building your UI? Is it React? Is it something other than that? I mean, there's so much that goes into it, and I think people oversimplify the actual development of it and the end result.
Yeah, I think you're right. Wow. It's funny is Marc's talking about many years ago when we first met, talking about we're using Kafka, or because a lot of people were, but today I still read stuff today that's what people do when they want to build some streaming analytics. They're grabbing Kafka, or they're grabbing Spark. They're grabbing Flink.
Flink.
Yeah. And so I still hear that today.
And people have made significant capital investments on their back ends for all of that.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, at the end of the day, if that's what you want to use, I'm like, I don't really care, right? I mean, we can build plugins for just about anything.
Yeah.
And you can still use the underlying framework and just subscribe to topics if that's what you want to do. But just know that all of that stuff comes at a cost.
Subscribing to topics, that sounds a lot like MQTT to me, dude.
It does. Now, that's a whole nother conversation, right? When we're talking about messaging and brokers and all of that kind of stuff, which, like I said, it does become a bit complex when you start looking at the flight of the packets and what you're trying to do while it's in flight. And I just don't think that many people really want to sit down and have that conversation, because what is it again? People mistake invention for innovation and vice versa.
All the time. You're right. So you said you want Java developers and you want Python. I'm assuming when you say Python, it's to help you with machine learning because of all the great libraries that it has.
Yeah.
What was always always would confound me, though, is that Python is one of the slowest performing programming languages on the planet. And so you're building all the rest of your system using the fastest, high speed, whatever. And then here's Python, which slows down your whole.
But that's the thing. You don't want to trust Python for your first order problems. That's right.
Great that it's got all these cool libraries in it for math and all that fun stuff, but it's just not fast. That's what they're working on it. I know they're working. And I know there's a competitor called Julia, which looks just like Python, except it's really fast. like close to C, which is interesting. People are always creating new programming languages. Do we notice that? Like, there's people just sitting around.
There's always a better way.
Yes.
And Bill, you mentioned about .NET because that was a movement from Microsoft to copy Java concept into Microsoft.
Yeah.
Well, we were talking about that whole J++ thing and that whole big mess, and natural evolution.
I mean, again, there are simple things that I really try to keep it simple. I really do. And my whole goal in terms of the stuff that we're doing is to reduce friction. So let's not add things just because, right? Let's not lose sight of what problem we're trying to solve. Let's not lose sight of those things. When you do those things, innovation takes place.
Yeah.
It just happens because you're using the tools that were meant to be used in the place that they're meant to be used at, as opposed to trying to stretch them and say, well, we can kind of do it with this and we can kind of do it with that. Look.
That was always an annoying thing to me. Like if you're a professional developer and maybe you're a contract developer and you're going to go work for a customer and the customer says, oh, you have to build it using these languages and whatever. And they would already put you into a box. It's like, well, how about if I figure out your requirements and what makes sense? But so often companies are like, nope, this is how you're going to do it.
Yeah.
You're going to use Power Builder. You're going to use Delphi.
You want to throw another thing into the mix?
Go ahead.
Let's talk about legacy applications and K8s. I mean,
K8s.
I mean, look, people will say, I don't care, but the propaganda and all of that stuff, if you're going to build natively and you build using that framework, we're going to do it, containerized. I mean, we're going Kubernetes. Great. You can build it that way. But I think people have just gotten over enamored with the notion of microservices. They've gotten over enamored with K8s and containerized, and we can move from here to there. Look, AKS versus EKS versus any other KS, it's going to cause proliferation as you move cloud to cloud. Pick your horse and ride it.
That's it. Pick your horse and ride it.
Quote unquote.
I love that. That is awesome. Pick your horse and ride it off into the sunset. I love that.
Let's stop with this other stuff. And if you really want to take the time, again, there's three points, right? It's time to market, time to cash, right? Do you want speed, velocity? I mean, there's just those questions. What are you trying to do, and what problem are you trying to solve? Tie those things together and go get it.
Yeah,
and we can dispense with this. I need to invent something. Go right ahead, like going. You invented that. Let me show you how to innovate on it.
Right. So as we wrap up, how about 30 seconds or 1 minute? A takeaway. What's the biggest thing that just happened over the weekend? Anyone?
Ooh.
Anyone?
Kamala Harris.
No, not in tech. In tech.
Kamala Harris.
The new llama models came out.
CrowdStrike. Microsoft.
CrowdStrike.
Oh.
Took down the whole.
That's a whole other show. That's a whole other discussion.
That's a whole show.
That's an S-bomb conversation.
We'll save that for the next show because we could talk all day about that.
I was going to say F-bomb, not S-bomb.
Yeah,
that too.
It's definitely an F-bomb.
Maybe that's the next topic is what the hell happened there. There's an interesting history. I think I posted a little bit on it. So when I was in Windows, and there was a lot of discussion around Norton and McAfee, and the issue around CrowdStrike just goes back to this kernel access that Microsoft's always provided. And the reason they've really provided it, frankly, is economic, is because the PC OEMs wanted to bundle McAfee and Norton to get the revenues on their kind of lower margin PC business. And so they told Microsoft, you need to provide hooks for them to be able to do this so we could monetize it, so we could pay you for Windows, basically. And so that's kind of why those hooks were always left open. And then Microsoft came out with their own solution, and there was a kind of a DOJ thing, whatever. But
yes,
that's a good example of where a business model and a kind of an ecosystem can kind of go in and mess with kind of good engineering principles. And,
you're right.
You know, feel bad
Biggest
for
takeaway,
the Delta flight.
Biggest takeaway, do not set your Microsoft to auto update.
Well, that's
don't do that.
But update it regularly.
Because it just goes. It just
Remember that scene from Space Force? I don't know if you've ever watched that show.
I watched a little bit of the first episode.
There's one episode where there's this critical moment where they have to get the guy from the moon or whatever in the space station, and then in the control room, all of a sudden it says like Windows Update. The guy's like,
oh my gosh! Wow.
Anyway, tough one.
Yeah,
but that's a whole other discussion.
That's all discussion. We'll talk about that next week. You're right. We could go deep on that
one.
So thanks everyone for joining us today on IoT Coffee Talk. We talked a lot about programming languages, the history of Java, Sun Microsystems, Anders Heilsberg. Bill came up and blew up .NET, which is great. Good for him. You know, Marc's smarter than all of us, luckily. That's why he's in Barcelona and we're not. There's Duke. We all remember Duke from We Got It, Java 1. That was good stuff. The reason you're here, though, is because we're smarter than everyone else, and we talk about important things that's going to change your life for the better. And we support Elevate Our Kids. So make sure and donate. You know, we're going to get some laptops, get some internet connectivity for these kids. We're really crossing the chasm and bridging that digital divide. It's not a lot of talk, it's action, and we really do it right where it begins with our youngsters, with the kids. And so anyway, get some merch.
ElevateOurKids.org, is that the website?
I think that's what it is. Yeah, absolutely. And on another note, make sure early next week you watch the latest episode of Windows Phone WTF, where we have
Joe Belfiore.
That's going to be good. Thanks for the love there, Marc. Wow. We will see you on the other side. We are out.